You mentioned about this thesis that you did, the research. What was the focus on? What did you want to discover? What did you discover from this research on young men in Ireland?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, was there anything in Irish culture, in our what's called indigenous wisdom, our culture, our history, our background? We're a Celtic Christian background and
Hmm.
history. Was there anything there that could be added to Richard Rohr's process?
Hmm.
It's a pretty well defined process, uh, a program, if you like, but it's more a process. Was there anything there we could add to that? Because Rohr designed it from his point of view, American, and it's generally generic. But I wanted to see, was there stuff in our past speak to the young Irishmen in a deeper way or more
Mm.
authentic way, or not? That was the research.
Yeah.
Was maybe it's good enough. It was very interesting. I interviewed young men who came from a sporty club setting. I interviewed young men who had gone through a rites of passage themselves. There were young guys who had done it in the UK. I interviewed some of the older men who had acted as elders.
Mm.
I interviewed people like in my field, if you like, of youth work, kind of psychology, that area, to see their viewpoints. So I did a good bit of chatting,
Mm.
good bit of conversations. And obviously, because it's the level it's at, you have to do a deep dive into the literature already written on it.
Hmm.
Yeah. So there was not that much to be found written in the Irish context. There is stuff from around the world.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, the findings were interesting. Not too surprising, but interesting.
Hmm.
I think one of the key findings was my research supervisor. We pinned this down. I couldn't quite get my head around it until we had a chat, and I realized then where I had to go with it. It's that Irish men, and so all the comments I make now is in relation to Irish men. I'm
Mm.
sure they could apply a lot of them generically across the world. You guys, wherever.
Yeah.
Irish men, in my research, I found have lost the language of spirituality. So first and foremost, a rites of passage process is a spiritual process. It is psychological, it is anthropological, sociological, it's all of those. But at its core, it's a spiritual process. And if you can understand that, that gives you the setting and the grounding to launch into it. You can
Hmm.
do lots of stuff about coming of age through just psychology or sociology. You can do lots of stuff. But I was interested in a spiritual viewpoint or a prism to view this. I find that in the research, it came up really, Irishmen have lost the language. But as far as I can see, it's not lost forever. It's just consigned to the subconscious. And it can
Mm.
become brought back from the subconscious quite easily. It's not as big a job as if you're in a nation of people that for a long time there's been no spiritual practice. I think that would
Hmm.
be a different story.
Hmm.
Yeah, they've lost the language, and so they cannot articulate men very well
Yeah.
at all. Women are much, much better, more skilled at articulation conversation. Um, in the research, we found that Irish men respond best to a physical, a grounded, earthy, embodied spirituality.
Hmm.
So when I asked some of the young people if they, for example, related it to a faith dimension or a faith practice, did they have any? And the older men and people I talked to, the question was, why don't men do this kind of work? Why don't they, for example, attend if it's a church or a mosque or a synagogue? Why are they poor at practice?
Hmm.
And it came up. One man very strongly said to me, Irish men don't do well in buildings. They don't
Hmm.
do well. They need to be outside buildings and
Hmm.
they need to pray looking at the stars.
Mm.
So if you like, I thought, okay, it's an embodied kind of visceral gut spirituality.
Mm.
And that's why Rohr's stuff and Rites of Passage, which is very strong on ritual, very strong on ritual. That's why it appeals to men, I think. Um, in the research, we kind of found that there's a void in men's life. If they have grown up in Ireland, usually through the Christian tradition, either Catholic or Protestant, they'll have come through certain ceremonies when they're kids. baptism, confession, communion, and confirmation. And confirmation for an Irish lad and girl is about 12 years old, 13 years old. And after that, there's no ceremonial or ritual involvement in the church until and unless they get married or become a priest themselves or a nun, like a personnel of the church, or when they come to die, which is the end of life ceremonies. So there's a gap of ritual and a gap of ceremony. And so the research I read was that boys love and need ceremony. They need ritual. They need creative, magical almost events. So in our society, we have lost that, not just only in church and the faith area, but in general ways. And if they don't get it, they recreate it. So old Irish Celtic and Irish cultural events like Halloween have become swamped by a generic across the world, probably mainly from American sources originally, type of Halloween celebration, but it's empty, I would say, and therefore of little value to them. So that is part of the work of the men's work, is to recreate and rebuild all that magical, enchanted, culturally strong context that we did have and we have let go. And I argued in my thesis, men are suffering because of that loss, and because they're very much poorer than women at articulating how they feel about this. It can come out in antisocial behavior or self-harm behavior or all the types of behavior that makes people afraid of young men and mistrust. Yeah, so there was a lot of work done on what is in our indigenous wisdom, what is there in Ireland, what is there in Irish culture. So I did a good bit of kind of research on all that. And one of the things that comes in from across the world is in Rites of Passages. It's a kind of a three-part process: beginning, the middle, and the end. The preparation, the going out, and the coming home. I'm just making it simple there, but that can be subdivided. But in the coming back, this is where it really is crucial that societies need to recognize this. When the young men come back from whatever they've gone to become a man, that process, when they return, they must return to a village that accepts them and affirms them. And how do we do that in modern world where the concept of village is fading rapidly, where I'd say a lot of the population of the world lives in big cities now or in large urban areas. So the concept of village, one of the findings is, however we have to do it, we have to rebuild the village. So the old saying, it takes a village to raise a child, is very true. And that's that return, that reincorporation of the young man, welcome back home into his peers, his family, all of that to the village, to the society he comes from, and is recognized now as being a man, is a crucial psychological step. And that's missing in a lot of processes nowadays.